I've got a couple of like low-key picks that I'm always going to have in the back of my mind, that I'm always going to talk about in incredibly high regard, and they're the underdogs, the guys that nobody ever focuses on. And in this fight, we have one of those Craig's underground picks, Claudio Silva. This guy, what can I say? You look at the record of 14-1, you might think, well, Craig, why are you so high on this guy? Because his jiu-jitsu is absolutely amazing, and he's on a huge win streak. He lost his debut, so he's won 14 straight fights. You look at the wins in the UFC. He beats Brad Scott. All right, who cares? He beat Leon Edwards, who's in the title conversation. He beat Nordine Taleb. He beat Danny Roberts. He beat Cole Williams. And now he's taking on James Krause. He is my welterweight, Leonardo Santos, and I don't get to say that very often because neither one of those guys fight very often, and that's the issue for Claudio Silva. He fights Williams in 2019, he fights Roberts in 2019, once in 2018 against Nordine Taleb. The Leon Edwards fight was almost 6 years ago. Claudio Silva hasn't been overly, what could you say? Active? Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. And for the James Krause, I mean, it seems like every weekend, Glory Fitness and MMA, we have to talk about them like that. We have to mention it in the same breath that Laura Sanko would with her teammates over there, because we just continually see them pumping out quality fighters at the UFC level. And you see them coming up in the smaller organizations, the CFFCs, CESs, more or less the LFAs, coming out of Missouri. James Krause really leading the charge. You see him cornering a lot of fighters. And I know we've talked about this in the past with fighters like, it's weird because he's on the broadcast panel now, but the Michael Chiesas, the Rashad Evans, the Michael Johnsons, where they've cornered a lot of their guys, and we've seen it pay some dividends in some of their fights. I know Michael Johnson might seem like a poor example, but you see guys later on in their careers or as they progress really, bestow their wisdom upon some of their pupils. And for James Krause, it's worked out very well. This is a guy that you might have counted out a long time ago in his original run with the UFC. He's really put things together lately. I know his last fight was a loss to Trevin Giles, but it's a lot closer than just an L on your record.
Exactly. And I'm going to shout it to Lance Stevenson, Born Ready, because that's what James Krause's nickname should be, Born Ready. James Krause fought at 155, 170, and 185, and the fight at 185 was on like a day's notice just because he was in town cornering another one of his fighters anyways. They're like, hey, you want to fight Trevin Giles? I'll be honest, thought he beat Trevin Giles. He completely out-grappled him in the first round. Trevin Giles beat him in the second round. Then the third round is pretty back and forth. Giles, of course, is quite tired by that point, so is Krause. But I gave Krause the nod in that decision. I thought he deserved it. And how crazy would that have been, too, for James Krause on 1 day's notice to move up a weight class he's never fought in and beat Trevin Giles. He's a fairly good fighter. Besides that, though, James Krause has an opponent who I think represents Claudio Silva very, very well. So James Krause fought Warlley Alves, and that was a fight that I was really concerned because I know James Krause is a phenomenal grappler, but when you start to hear those names of the Claudio Silvas, the Warlley Alves, like those are the guys they've got that one-shot, one-kill jiu-jitsu on the ground, kind of similar to Brian Ortega in our main event, where any second of grappling that you spend with these guys, it's always dangerous. And James Krause just beat him everywhere, isn't Alves, another guy who, not the most active guy in the world, but he has wins over those top-level competitions. He has wins over the guys like Colby Covington. So if we're going to bring it up for Claudio Silva, we have to bring it up for Warlley Alves. And James Krause was able to go out there, not only outstrike him, but out-wrestle him. And I thought he put on a really good performance in that fight. Now, yes, Warlley Alves isn't the same fighter that he used to be in those fights, but the grappling does hold up no matter what. And I thought James Krause looked great in that fight. And Sergio Moraes, too. Those were back-to-back fights against two world-class jiu-jitsu guys. James Krause is able to beat them. And it's kind of this consistent thing that we've seen in James Krause as of late, where he's much more of a finisher now than he used to be early on in his career, because I think people know how good his grappling are, and they're kind of hesitant about him shooting for takedowns, and it really opens up his striking. And his striking, it's not the flashiest that you're ever going to see, but he just has that kind of perfect mix of, I'm a volume striker, but if I can start to land my combinations, I can put you away. So James Krause, I do think, is the much more well-rounded out of these two guys, but if Claudio Silva can take him down at any point, we saw it with Nordine Taleb. I remember the commentary leading up to that fight was, well, Claudio Silva, he's been out for a while, like, yeah, he beat Leon Edwards, but it's been a bit, and, after 4 years, you don't know what you're going to see. And Nordine Taleb, at the time at least, was still a highly regarded welterweight. Claudio Silva choked him out like it was nothing. He just went through him like a hot knife through butter. So, although I do think very highly of Claudio Silva, I think he needs to win in one way. He needs to get this fight to the ground. Whereas James Krause, I think if he takes down Silva, he is at least comfortable enough and a good enough grappler that in top position, he won't be getting submitted. I don't think he'll get swept. And I think on the feet, James Krause is the much better striker out of the two.
Well, now, we look at the total amount of votes on this one over on Tapology to 624. 56% going Krause, 72% saying he's going to win by decision. The 44% that have Silva, 59% saying he's going to win by submission. If we have a look at the odds, they're very close for this one. James Krause, the favorite, he opened a minus 115. That line dropped quick, and he's now a minus 185 favorite. For Silva, opened a minus 105. He's now a plus 154. I think this is one of the more competitive fights. It's a bit of a head scratcher too, and I do like the odds here. I do think that they make a lot of sense. I mean, Claudio Silva's won 14 fights in a row, and he's been able to finish some pretty decent names. And for James Krause, the recent run, I mean, just scratch the fight against Trevin Giles and consider what you have. A lot of great wins. Now, Warlley Alves, I squint and I make faces, this and that, but Warlley Alves was a guy that had said consistently that he's been inconsistent, and he just doesn't show up, kind of like the Donald Cerrone of Brazil. He just goes into big fights and just can't deliver, Warlley Alves. But overall, yeah, I agree with you. James Krause is a much more well-rounded fighter in this one. Claudio Silva is really sketchy. Because again, that jiu-jitsu, if you leave something out there...
Like he wears a dark hood?
If he walks down dark alleys, that's where you find Claudio Silva. The mean streets of Coconut Creek, Florida. I've been there. I ate at your Steak and Shake. It was great. But as far as this fight goes, I think it's really competitive. I think Claudio Silva, there's definitely an opportunity. This might be one of the few times, though, where he's one of my guys. I'm going to side with James Krause ever so slightly in this fight, though.
I've been saying James Krause all day, but right when Craig said James Krause, something clicked in my head, and I'm like, Claudio Silva's probably going to submit James Krause. It's just one of those fighters who, Claudio Silva, you don't expect a lot from. And again, that's kind of his own fault due to the inconsistency. He is a little bit older at this point, but Claudio Silva's constantly in the gym training for fights, whereas James Krause, he's openly said, like, he doesn't really even want to fight anymore. Like, when he wants to fight, he'll accept fights, but other than that, like, he's more than happy to just continue being a trainer and be kind of the head of his gym. I'm not saying that means James Krause isn't in shape, of course. I just mean Claudio Silva is much more dedicated to, okay, I'm trying to win these fights, whereas James Krause's dedication is more, I'm trying to help these other people win their fights. And I think the motivation for Silva, if he can get a really nice submission win in this, maybe give him a ranked opponent just because, you know, give respect to his win streak. I know he's not a name that a lot of people know, and I know he's not the most spectacular of guys, but at a certain point, if you win 15 in a row, people are going to have to start taking notice. So I'm going to pick Claudio Silva. My heart is saying James Krause, but my brain's saying Claudio Silva in this one.
You're a dingus. I'm going Krause. You're going Silva. I'm really looking forward to this one, though. We've got a great card coming up, including an extended look at our main event between Brian Ortega coming back after a really long layoff, taking on Jung, the Korean Zombie. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it.